Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about the latest U.S. Census Bureau data showing Illinois growing, driven by international migration into the state. And we'll get the latest in the trial against former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. I'll then join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Tired of being in the dark about what happens day to day under the dome in Springfield? Do you want to be more informed in the decision-making process? If so, you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch elected officials in action, holding them accountable, and having your say on issues that matter most to you. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to stay informed about Illinois state government and to be a more engaged citizen. Become a subscriber today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. In the past year, Illinois saw nearly 113,000 people from other countries move into the state, helping the state grow by nearly 68,000 people. Vintage 2024 numbers from the U.S. Census were released Thursday. For the first time in a decade, Illinois gained population. WirePoint's president Ted Dabrowski said some may applaud the state increasing population after 10 years of losses, but the numbers paint an ominous picture.
Thank President Biden for opening up the floodgates of the border, right? That's the only reason we grew in population.
International migration was 113,000 for the year, offsetting the 56,235 people who left for other states.
It's a tough way to try to replace wealthy or productive citizens from Illinois who moved to other states and then replace them with lower income, struggling immigrants.
In the past 4 years, the U.S. Census notes that Illinois lost 111,000 people on net. Michael Madigan's defense team has begun calling witnesses to the former Illinois House Speaker's corruption trial. Jim Talamonte has the latest in that ongoing story.
Madigan and co-defendant Michael McLean are charged with 23 counts of bribery, racketeering, and official misconduct. Elmhurst University political science professor Connie Mixon said a lack of direct evidence makes it harder to prove there were bribes.
It's harder, to make the case that there was actually a racketeering enterprise.
Mixon cited more blatant examples in other political corruption cases.
It's not, as you said, the freezer full of cash or cash underneath a mattress that was handed specifically to Madigan or his associates.
The court is now in recess until December 30th, when the judge scheduled a charge conference with attorneys. The jury is off until January 2nd. I'm Jim Talamonte.
And those are the top stories from the past week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss the news. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Do you know what elected officials in Illinois are doing with your tax dollars? Do you want to make sure that your voice is heard? If so, then you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, hold them accountable for their actions, and be a more informed citizen. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to get involved in the democratic process and to make a difference in your community. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. We are recording this on Thursday, December 19th. Greg, gonna bring you in here right away since next week is Christmas and Hanukkah. Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah to you and all of our listeners. Any special plans next week, Greg?
Just looking forward to getting together with family and taking some time off work. I am, however, upset that it doesn't look like, at least in central Illinois, we're going to have a white Christmas. So hopefully we get a little bit of a post-Christmas surprise.
We're up here in the suburbs of Chicago, Greg. We're expecting some snow this evening, as a matter of fact.
Lucky.
I don't know if it's going to stick around next week, but we shall see. Hey, Greg, just today, the U.S. Census Bureau released its annual population estimates for states across the country. For the first time in years, Illinois saw a net increase in population year over year. But that was largely driven by the border crisis and the tens of thousands of migrants who entered the state. Tell us more, Greg.
Yeah, so the U.S. Census, they put out multiple different reports throughout the year. And every year on this date, December 19th, when we're reporting this, the U.S. Census put out the most recent, what they call vintage numbers. So the vintage 2024 numbers shows the population estimate from July 1st, 2023 to July 1st of 2024. And you get to see really where Illinois is at in all of this. So we did increase population. This was after a decade of decline. This year, or this time last year, 1 year ago today, the latest numbers came out and showed that Illinois continued to lose population and was the 10th straight year of population decline. And it had escalated up to a certain point before it started to come down a bit. There was one point, Dan, where, we lost 10,000 people 1 year and then we lost 30,000 another year. It went up to 100,000+ people that we had lost in just 1 year. But after seeing that decade of decline, most recent numbers come out and we have increased population, about 68,000 on net, how many people we've gained. The Illinois population is now at about 12.79 million people, and that is an increase over last year's population of around 12.64 million people. So when you drill down into these numbers, though, you see where this is all coming from, because you can just talk about, the people moving in and out, but the census also provides every year these annual estimates, breaking things down on the number of births, the number of deaths, the natural change there may be, and also migration numbers. And this is where we see some interesting totals here. So Illinois had a total of out domestic migration, so people moving out of Illinois to other states domestically here in the United States. Dan, we didn't gain anybody moving into the state. So that's another story. We can tell a lot of different stories about all of this, but we didn't have anybody move into Illinois from other states on net. It was minus 56,000 people moved to other states in the past 12 months. But international migration was 112,955 just in 12 months. 112,955 people moved to Illinois on an international basis, meaning from other countries. And that was more than enough to completely offset the 56,000 that moved out of the state for a total of around 56,700 of net migration. But again, the total change, when you take those numbers into account with births and deaths, comes out to about 67,899. But Illinois breaking that decade of decline was heavily reliant on the 113,000 international migrants coming to the state of Illinois. Taking a little bit of a bigger look out, Dan, you see the similar numbers here for states like California. California had 361,000 international migrants in 1 year, and that offsets the state's domestic out migration of 239,000 people. New York had similar numbers as well, where it had, a lot of people moving out of the state, 336,000 people moving out of the state, 120,000 people moving out of the state, but they had 207,000 on an international basis move in, offsetting the people that moved out. So the big story here, and even the U.S. Census shows this in their news headline, is that international migration drove the U.S. population growth, and Illinois breaking that decade of decline and seeing a population increase.
Wow. And I mean, does the Census Bureau go back, break down those international migration numbers by country of origin? Like, do we know, is it the southern border crisis that is largely driving that? Or they don't break it down and it's a combination of folks from who cross over the southern border, come from Europe, come from Asia, come from Africa, other countries?
We don't have that level of detail. I'd have to go back and see the level of detail they provide with other updates. As I mentioned at the top, the census puts out multiple reports throughout the year. Right. A lot of times it's, big picture numbers, and then they start drilling down into counties, for instance, and then they might even drill down into cities. And some of these releases also include, migration details, where people may have moved from. So like, for instance, it would show, X number of people moved from Illinois to Florida, for instance. I'd have to go back and see if it does show indeed that X number of people moved in from a certain country. I don't know if they have that specificity of information in their data, but that would be something that I think would be pretty revealing here. But Dan, analysis of this, obviously one thing, right? We had a governor in Illinois, and the Democrats in Illinois for years denied that the state was losing population. Will this give them some sails behind their wings of saying, hey, Illinois is a growing state? So we have yet to get a statement from the governor's office. We do have a request for a comment, especially considering that he has denied the population declines the past several years. What are the Pritzker administration's thoughts on the state growing population? But when I chatted with Ted Dabrowski from WirePoints, he's been looking at these numbers for years as well. And he said what this really is the Biden administration's open border policy causing for states like New York and California and Illinois, states that were big losers in the 2020 census. Remember, we lost a seat in Congress because we kept losing population. But New York, California, and Illinois are big winners because of the Biden administration's open border position. And Dabrowski says, immigration's great. It's good to bring in hard workers and, the culture with that. But that's not what we have here. We had what he called, the floodgates opening up and people moving out of a state like Illinois, residents taking with them their taxable income and replacing that with thousands upon thousands more of lower skilled, lower income individuals in the state of Illinois. So he says that it's a disingenuous way to increase a state's population by having that level of unchecked migration.
And one final point on this, Greg. In addition to Biden's open border policies, as the Center Square has reported, there were more than 14 million illegal border crossers under Biden's nearly 4 years in office. Texas took the brunt of that, particularly early on, but then Texas Governor Greg Abbott came up with this busing plan where he bused tens of thousands of migrants to places like Chicago, to places like New York City, to places like Los Angeles. So he played a part in it too. But we'll see. I'm also interested in hearing what Governor Pritzker has to say about the latest census data. Moving on, Greg, you covered a court hearing today on gun rights groups' challenges to the state's firearms owners identification card. This is separate from Illinois' recent ban on more than 170 semi-auto firearms. This has to do with the state requirement that in order to purchase a gun in Illinois, you have to have a state ID, a FOID card. Tell us about the hearing.
Yeah, the firearm owner identification card. Dan, it's been around since the 60s, much longer than I've been alive. But if you wanted to purchase a firearm or even possess a firearm, you had to have a FOID card. It's still in place. They've modernized it. They've made digital FOID cards and forever FOID cards, and they've changed the law here and there. But really what it is, it's a requirement for a individual, law-abiding citizen to apply with Illinois State Police, pay a fee, and then wait 30 days to get a card that allows you to go to a store and purchase a firearm and possess that firearm in your home. Not just firearms, but ammunition as well. Illinois is one of 4 states that has some kind of gun owner ID law. Illinois is one of only 2 states that requires that simply to possess firearms and ammunition. So Guns Save Life, a gun rights advocacy organization, they challenged this in Sangamon County courts on its face, saying this violates the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is an infringement. They also said that recent U.S. Supreme Court precedent in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association case against the state of New York known as Bruin, they set up a 2-step test when it comes to challenging Second Amendment violations. One, it had to be, does the law rub up against the plain text of the Second Amendment? And number 2, are there any historical analogs of the founding era that would reflect the law that's being challenged? So the plaintiff said, this law is a violation of the Constitution. The state came in the circuit court and got the circuit court to toss the case out, essentially. But the plaintiffs took their challenge to the appeals court. And after multiple requests by the state to delay the case, and even a request by the state to say, don't take this case yet, appeals court, because there are other cases out there with similar challenges that are further along, and maybe we just stick with those. The appeals court denied the state's request several weeks ago to delay this and set a schedule. And they had the hearing today. And I tell you, it was rather fascinating because the judges really seemed to paint the state in a box, trying to get them to answer why they believe a requirement for somebody to pay the state for their Second Amendment right isn't a violation of the Second Amendment. And also, if there's any historical analogies to the FOID card in history. The state pointed to old laws about, like, for instance, you had to take a loyalty oath in order to be able to possess a firearm. That was pre-revolution, something that is abhorrent to others who think of these types of measures from way back then. Other things they pointed to were more race-specific laws, like a law down in Florida that prohibited racial minorities from owning certain types of repeating rifles. And the plaintiffs fired back and said these laws that they're saying are historical analogs to the FOID card have been shot down and aren't usable. So ultimately, you had the plaintiff saying the appeals court needs to find the law unconstitutional. The state saying, hey, we need to be able to have this in place so we can screen and make sure that anybody that has a firearm isn't a danger to themselves or others. But the plaintiffs on rebuttal, they came back and said that's not the way rights work. Everybody has these rights and they don't have to go through a litmus test in order to exercise those rights. There are laws in place that say if somebody's adjudicated as a criminal, if somebody's adjudicated mentally ill, if they go through the courts and the court makes a determination that somebody is a prohibited person, then that prohibited person's impacted by prohibitions. But not just every run-of-the-mill law-abiding citizen, as is the case in Illinois when it comes to the requirement to get the FOID card. So the judges really hashed out on this particular argument and seemed to put the state on its heels a bit. So it'll be interesting whenever they do make a decision in this case, what that decision could be. Would they enjoin the state from enforcing the FOID law? That would then have to go to the Illinois Supreme Court. Well, I've talked to the executive director of Gun Save Life, John Bach, previously on this, and he said that he's willing to take this all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court with this. So if the Illinois Supreme Court doesn't take the case, they could go to the U.S. Supreme Court with it because it's a constitutional question with the U.S. Constitution. But Dan, as these cases have been with me covering different types of challenges of gun control legislation, there's another case challenging a similar Maryland gun ID law that the U.S. Supreme Court could possibly take up. That case out of the Maryland federal courts has gone through the process, and the plaintiffs have requested that the U.S. Supreme Court take that case. So that could be something else where we'll be watching what happens in Washington, D.C. out of the Supreme Court, and if any rulings come out impacting gun laws, they very likely could impact Illinois.
Greg, I thought the legal process for challenging the state's ban on more than 170 semiotic firearms, I thought that was slow. This one has been I don't even know what's the adjective I'm looking for. The fact that it just had a court hearing today.
Protracted? Is that the right word? Long? Yeah. And listen, I mean, a lot of people in the Second Amendment advocacy space get frustrated by the length of time it takes in the courts to address these issues. They feel that with the stroke of a pen, lawmakers can take away their rights, but to try to get their rights back, it has to go through a very lengthy and laborious process in the judiciary.
That's a great way to explain it, Greg. Moving on, prosecutors have rested their case in the federal corruption trial of longtime former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. and the defense, including Madigan's co-defendant, Michael McLean, they've started to present their defense, their case against the government. Just give us an update on what's happened in the last few days of trial.
Well, we're about to enter week 12 of the Madigan McLean trial, and now we just get to the defense. After a very lengthy process of the prosecution laying out their case. So, I mean, just reflecting on that, Dan, all of the video evidence, all of the wiretapped phone calls, the emails, the witnesses, they brought up multiple former state legislators. They even brought up a sitting congresswoman to testify. So prosecutors had a lot they laid out there. Now it's in the court of the defense, and they've got the ball, and they're calling their own witnesses. So what's interesting, though, is today, Thursday, they have courts. They've got witnesses on the stand as we speak with the defense asking questions and providing their evidence in defense of Madigan and McLean, who have separate defenses. But all of that, of course, is going to have to be put on hold because, Dan, Christmas is next week. Right. And the judge has said that they're not going to be in on Christmas. And I think actually they're going to do some conferencing with the attorneys and the judge after Christmas. And from our reporter, Jim Talamonte, who's been inside that courtroom each and every day practically, and Brett Rowland as well, covering the case, the jury may not be back until January 2nd. So as long as it's been, there's going to be about a week off, and then they'll come back and finish up with the defense. We'll have closing arguments, and then the ball's going to be in the jury's courts, and they've got a lot to contend with.
Yeah, that's what's kind of amazing. I don't envy the jurors in this case. As you mentioned, it's about to enter its 12th week. That's 11 plus weeks of testimony, evidence such as secret recordings of Madigan and McLean and others. And then now you're going to take a week and a half or so off, and then the jurors have to come back and they have to retain all this information. That is tough, don't you think?
I believe it's very likely we're going to see a lot of questions come back from the jury with requests for more guidance, more clarity, maybe a request to get transcripts of certain evidence. But there's a lot. There's a lot on their plate, and what's I think is probably also very challenging for the jury, at least it would be for me if I was on the jury, Dan, is to keep my mouth shut while I'm not in the courtroom. Not being able to talk about this, not being able to read up about it, that in itself is also a challenge, especially as long as this trial's been. But it's all about accountability. Madigan was the longest serving state house speaker in history of the United States. He was also the chair of the Democratic Party of Illinois. That nexus of power he had to not only steer what gets passed in the state house, but also to control the party purse, clearly gave him an immense amount of power. To where prosecutors had their eye on it, put wiretaps on his associates, undercover cameras on some of his other associates. They built a case of nearly 9-year-long bribery and racketeering scheme they dubbed the Madigan Enterprise. So we're here at the trial now. Defense is providing their side. The jury will get the case soon, and this entire saga will be in the history books.
Well, hopefully jurors are able to enjoy the break without talking to family members, extended close family, etc., during the holidays. But that's, as you said, that's a tough task to get back to work in early January, and let's wrap this thing up. Greg, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with all of these stories and more at thecentersquare.com.